as young as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a father, like in a way that I think it worried my my parents a little bit. Like, we don't want to be grandparents too soon. I always like the way that sometimes you hear girls talk about, oh, I can't wait to be a mom. I was talking as young as I can remember, the 10, 11, like, wow. Oh, like the power of like being a dad, like.
What is up, everybody? It is Ed Gough Jr. from the Dad Central Show and Dad Central, and nursing himself back to health with his family. Who do I have here?
Drew Soleyn of the Dad Central Show. Yes, nursing myself back to health slowly, and also nursing now sick kids back to health.
Oh,
so,
no.
You know, hopefully we all make it through the next week or two and into the holidays.
You bad father. You got your kids. I'm just joking. Sorry to hear about that.
But I quarantined myself as best I could to keep everyone else as healthy as possible. But, you know,
sorry.
This is the time of the year, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But you work through it.
Yeah, well, yeah, you just find a way. Well, I'm sorry to hear that this family's not 100%, but I'm speaking that everything will be soon, very good, and you'll be even better than your usual self.
Sounds good to me.
Good stuff. What's been going on otherwise?
Well, the time we're recording this is just leading into the holiday season. So, you know, it's the time of year where you can get really stressed out if you let yourself. And I think I sent Krista an article this morning about 8 ways to de-stress the holiday season. And so some of them were good reminders. Some of them were like, oh, we should probably do some of this. And so, you know, it's a delicate time of year for some, or hard time, I think, for some. But I think the goal in this article is fantastic. Maybe I'll share it even on our links for the show, of ways to really focus on what matters most through this time of year and not get caught in the commercialism and craze and the expectations that really don't match what you want to achieve in your family. So that's a great reminder.
Yeah, just piggybacking what you're sharing, I think that we all have to realize that this is not always a happy time of the year for everybody. You know, so don't make that assumption it's a happy time. And I'm going to put a challenge out to our family out there who are either listening or watching this. I'm going to challenge you, reach out to one person you haven't reached out to for a long time, because that may be the best gift that person may get during this holiday season. So if you do that, get in touch with us and tell us who it was and why you went out to, whether it's a text message, a phone call, video message, who that person was, why did you reach out to them, and how did it make your life and their life better? So I'm just putting that challenge out there. That could be the greatest gift, because I tell people, oh, what can I get you? What can I get you? I say the greatest gift they can give me is their time.
Well, at the end of the day, what matters most usually is connection and relationship. So the more you can create that, I think the better off you are.
Yeah, well, we have another new friend on today from Fenway Park. No, I'm just joking. We have another new friend on the Dad Central Show today. Really excited because he has so many different layers in a good way, so many different streams of knowledge, thought process, lived experience. So just know that this is the first of a few conversations we're going to be having with this new friend of the Dad Central Show. I'll let Drew do the introduction.
All right. Yeah, we're thrilled to have Dr. Roberto Olivardia, and he's a clinical psychologist. He's also a lecturer in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and a clinical associate at McLean Hospital. He's got a private psychotherapy practice where he specializes in the treatment of ADHD, executive functioning issues, and issues that face students with learning differences. He's also specializes in the treatment of body dysmorphic disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder, and in the treatment of eating disorders in boys and men. I can go on. He's got a much longer intro, but I'm going to stop right there and welcome Dr. Olivardia to the show. Thanks for being here. We're looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Okay. How often do you get to Fenway? And I'm saying that, folks, because he is based in Boston. For all you baseball fans. So I just had to say, like, do you get to Fenway?
I'm not a huge sports fan. I'm a music guy. So I am actually I'm seeing Green Day next August in Fenway.
What?
They're playing at Fenway Park with Smashing Pumpkins and Rancid and the Linda Lindas. And I'm very excited about that. So I'm more of a music guy.
Okay.
But I do like, once a summer, I do like to go to a Red Sox game. There's just something so Boston about it. I'm born and raised here. So it's just the feel for it. Not, it's not as much to like watch the game as much as just the ambiance of it, but music. Absolutely. Oh yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that.
All right. Well, Drew, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Ed and Doctor. We love to get a little bit of the backstory of our guests before we maybe get into the main topic. So could you tell us a little bit more about what life was like for you growing up?
So I grew up in a city about 15 minutes north of Boston called Somerville, Mass, which is right near Cambridge, Mass, where people know of where Harvard University. I grew up in I loved my upbringing. I mean, it was a very middle class, very diverse city with two immigrant parents. My dad was from Panama. My mom was Brazilian. I'm the youngest of three, very much the youngest. I have an older brother and sister who are 6 and 5 years older than me. So I was definitely the baby of the family. And my siblings say that I basically were raised by different parents than they were because my parents were tired by the time I came, and I definitely gave them the biggest run for their money. And I was a very big music lover, grew up in a household where music was, my dad was a huge music lover, and very curious kid, very mischievous kid, bright, but hated school. Really did not like school very much, had good friends. And my friends typically were kids who were funny. If you have a good sense of humor, that was good in my book. And a lot of kids that now, sort of as we all look back, had ADHD and had learning issues and differences. And we all kind of shared a very similar sensibility of kind of being very mischievous and impulsive in ways. But back then, this was in the 70s, I mean, there was so little known about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And the kids who were diagnosed back then were kids who had pretty serious conduct disorders, which I didn't have a conduct disorder. I was more mischievous, but not, I wasn't a disciplinary issue in that regard. Wonderful parents, wonderful family, always supported me, but not, I wouldn't say always understood me, but definitely always supported me.
Well, that's great. Ed, you want to hop in?
Yeah, just quickly. No, yeah, go ahead. You go ahead, Drew. Go ahead. Because both of you are just jumping at the good. There we go. Go ahead, Drew.
Well, that last part I think is very interesting. Didn't always understand me. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think, with ADHD in particular, I mean, just in a nutshell for people who might not know exactly what it is, because it's one of those conditions that I think most people think they know what it is, or they might know like this much, a very little amount about it. But basically, it's what we call a neurodiverse condition. So it's not an illness. It's a way that the brain is wired that makes it hard to regulate lots of things, including your attention. So if we are interested in something, we're 150% hyper-focused on it. If we're not interested in it, it's really hard to pay attention. And so this is beyond, anyone can relate to. If they find something boring, their attention isn't going to be as good. But for someone with ADHD, it's very difficult to sort of maintain that and regulate that level of attention. And then you have issues of what we call like impulsivity, kind of doing things without always thinking or thinking of the long-term consequences. And this is, again, even with same age peers. I mean, obviously there's a developmental level, like many 9-year-olds don't think of future consequences, but 9-year-old kids with ADHD really don't think of those future consequences, even as compared to their 9-year-old non-ADHD peers. You'll often see hyperactivity, although not everyone with ADHD has the hyperactivity where they're sort of restless and fidgeting and kind of always on the go. There's another presentation called the inattentive presentation, and that's the person who might be sitting still, but in their minds, they're daydreaming or really having a hard time regulating attention. And then there's what we call all the executive functions. So all of the things our brain needs to do to get things done: manage time, organize, prioritize, make decisions, memory, all of these kinds of things. And people with ADHD can have very difficult time executing, which then can get misunderstood if people aren't properly educated as being not intelligent, which isn't the case. Your intelligence is very different than your executive functioning capacity. But with ADHD, it's a very important thing because, especially with the impulsivity, that untreated or unmanaged ADHD can put people at risk for serious issues. I mean, we carry a much significantly higher risk for addiction because whatever we like, we can run the risk of liking too much. School can be very difficult if it's boring. Again, there are lots of kids with ADHD who might love school and it might not present as much of a problem. But I really didn't like school until college. Actually, college and on, I loved because I was studying exactly what I wanted to study. So I think with having ADHD, I was pretty impulsive kid. And I think in ways, I think people made assumptions because I was a decent student. I got good grades, but I was kind of procrastinating, kind of cutting corners. I never read a book that was assigned to me. I would just kind of skim read it. So I don't always think that I was understood, and not in a way, I don't put any blame on my parents or anyone for that. I think it was, I didn't always understand it. I just, even looking back as a kid, some of the things that I would do that I look back and think, oh my gosh, that was so dangerous, to do. That was so crazy impulsive. What was I thinking? And the thing is, I wasn't sometimes. Or I would say to my friends, my line when I was a kid was, well, whatever happens, it'll be a story. Whatever happens, it'll be a story. That was sort of my justification for the shenanigans. I used to call them shenanigans when I learned that word in third grade. I thought that was the funniest word. And I was like, I like that word. It sounds like what it is, shenanigans. But yeah, I had to try to explain to my parents why I would do, and not that they knew every situation I got mixed up in, but the ones that they did, they always leaned in with a sense of trying to understand, which I very much always appreciated.
I just want to jump in quickly because that word understanding. How did your parents manage? Because you're in that world today, but reflecting back, how did your parents manage, and do they have a better sense of that understanding today?
Yeah, so both of my parents have passed.
My condolences.
Thank you. They lived wonderfully long lives, and just very high quality lives. So it was, I think any way that people would want to live their lives, both of them lived. But even as an adult, having conversations, especially because I have two children, I have an 18-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter, and both of them have ADHD and dyslexia, which is basically a language-based learning disability that primarily affects reading and spelling. And these genes are strong in the family. My mom absolutely, without a doubt, had ADHD, but she wasn't diagnosed. Back in where she grew up and at her time, there was so little known again about it. But it's funny as adults having conversations about this, especially where, my kids were displaying some of those symptoms and my son was just a ball of energy, and I totally understood it. And it, now that we have sort of the better frame, I would be explaining to them, oh, this is why X, Y, and Z happens. And this is why, and especially I think for my parents, because back in that day, I think especially for moms, for my mother probably felt like, oh, I can't always control, I can't control my kid. And a lot of times ADHD even now sometimes gets reflected of, oh, you're not doing a good enough job controlling your kid or managing them, or that somehow it's the fault of the parent. And so I always wanted to share that kind of information and education to let them know, not only did there was no fault of their own, but they did a really good job in the ways that they could. Like I grew up where there was one TV in my house. We didn't get cable, and granted, it was an extra expense and everything was about saving for college, but I knew they got cable eventually when I went to college. And I think they knew who their kid was. Like I loved TV. I would have been glued to it even more so if I had access to MTV. So I think my dad was an educator. He was a teacher, and he was very gentle and very, just always leaned into trying to understand. And my mom, if she had the privileges I had, would have absolutely been a psychologist or a social worker, very empathic, so I think they just led with that. And I think when you lead with that, which was a wonderful, powerful example for me as a dad, and just leaning with that and trying to understand someone's story, even if you don't always agree. I mean, I wasn't the easiest person to, as an adolescent, even if there wasn't an agreement, but if you lean in with, okay, well, what is the story? Where is this person coming from? And I always felt that sense of not telling me what I should be as much as trying to meet me where I was at.
Thanks for sharing that. Go ahead, Drew.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful principle. And, there are a couple things you said there, but that last part is, to me, a really valuable part that I think every dad can embrace. And because I've experienced that with my children, even talking with Kristen today, it's like, okay, what were they really thinking? And it's like, what's going on there? And really trying to get beyond the surface level behavior to the what's going on beneath it. So could you maybe share some practical things that you experienced from your parents that conveyed that message of, at least they're trying to understand me? And then maybe even from your experience as a dad, like, what do you do to try and demonstrate that to your children?
Yeah, the example that comes to mind is, just as you asked this, is third grade. So this is in 1980. And I had to write a paragraph. We were all assigned a Greek god or goddess, and mine was Athena, the goddess of wisdom. And I had to write like a paragraph, or I had to type it actually on the typewriter. And this is common with ADHD. I was procrastinating on it. I just didn't want to do it. I just couldn't get my ideas like sort of organized. And I really didn't want to be doing it. And so I'm staring at this blank page, and my brother had a cassette of Queen, and Another One Bites the Dust. And I remember putting it in my tape recorder, and it's such a great song, of course. And that bass line, the do, 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 and the rhythm of it. And I had the music on, and my dad, again, he was a teacher, that he said, oh no, you can't have music while you're trying to do something. That's, distracting you. Like you have to have quiet, basically. And I said, well, all I can tell you is that when I had quiet, there was almost more noise going in my head. And I remember saying that and putting my hands like, when I have the music going, the ideas are just flowing, and I'm able to kind of put those words out. And this is what, to me, was powerful. He said, okay, well, and I think he said 10 minutes, if I remember correctly. He's like, I'll come back up in 10 minutes and see where you're at. And when he came back, I was done. Like the music was such a facility. And to this day, I have not written an essay, a paper, a book chapter, anything without the aid of music. On my dissertation, which is a 160-page dissertation, in my acknowledgments, I thanked Green Day and Nirvana and Hole and the Go-Go's and the Ramones, like all these bands I was listening to while writing my dissertation, because it's a facilitator for me. So he came back up, and I was done. And that was one of those things. He just didn't because his brain just doesn't operate that way. And again, these conventional ways that we're taught, like you need total quiet. When you have ADHD, you're kind of a bit out of the box. And so sometimes you need out of the box strategies to actually ground you. And so some of the things that might actually distract other people could be very grounding for people with ADHD. But what was powerful, and I don't think I fully absorbed it then in that moment, but definitely as I reflect back, was even though it was so antithetical to how he operated and to everything that conventionally says what good study habits are is you're quiet. He said, let's do an experiment, basically. Now he could have come back and I could have had nothing written, and then he would have had more of a platform to say it doesn't work. And I would have been more on board with it, because I was the type of kid, I wasn't like, I wasn't an I told you so, like, or do it because I'm telling you to do it. I needed like justification. I wasn't, just going to accept it just because. And so the fact that he sort of allowed that, and then when he saw that it worked, was like, okay, it worked. I don't think he understood how it worked because he was sort of wired differently. And as a dad, which, I could tell you from as young as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a father, like in a way that I think it worried my my parents a little bit. Like, we don't want to be grandparents too soon. But I don't know, I always like the way that sometimes you hear girls talk about, oh, I can't wait to be a mom. I was talking as young as I can remember, the 10, 11, like, wow, like the power of like being a dad, like shaping like these children's lives and sharing this and the love. Like, I mean, it was something that I can tell you when my son was born. I mean, even just talking about it now, I can feel it. Like, it was just, and so there's no greater role to me than being a dad to my two kids, because of just this connection and the relationship. And I, just as my dad was a teacher, even as a psychologist, I feel that comes through in teaching people how to live their best lives, that's sort of how I see. So we have a lot in common in that regard. But definitely as a parent, just holding that to say, okay, I have all of this information, and it's especially being a psychologist, there's this additional information, that I have about human behavior. And at the same time, I realize the first and foremost is I'm a dad, and my child has their own unique experience. And there are a lot of similarities. Like, my son and I look a lot, we're very alike. I mean, people refer to us as like the twins, because it's remarkable, our sense of humor, the way we operate. And at the same time, I realize, well, he's growing up in 2023, very different time than when I was, growing up. And so I might think I always understand where they're coming from, and I don't all the time. So I have to go into leaning into, you tell me what your experience is and your story is. And so I always try to lean with that, and always set a foundation of humor. Like, we're very in touch with our sense of humor in our family, which I think is a very important thing. And I wouldn't say in my family, it's not that they were humorless. I think there was definitely humor, but my sense of humor was sort of very different than the rest of my families, in ways that they were like, I can go there, in ways. And so, but I always think of humor as a therapeutic tool too. Things are easier when you can kind of step back and sometimes laugh, at certain experiences. But particularly having kids with ADHD and dyslexia, that I'm like, okay, here we go. Like, it wasn't a shock, because I know how strong the genetics are. So now, how do I set my kids up to not see themselves as less than, or have things be as hard for them, and give them that foundation of, this is just the way that your brain is wired, and this is what we're going to do about it, and for them to feel supported.
Good stuff. Drew, go ahead.
Well, I may have a couple different thoughts, but maybe we'll land on, when it comes to identifying, what age, I guess, were your kids when you found out that they had ADHD or dyslexia?
So I joke with the ADHD. My son, I could have diagnosed prenatally, because he was very active in the womb. I mean, I'm not kidding. Every ultrasound that we would have, the radiologist would be like, whoa, you have a very active kid. I'm like, yep. And he came into the world like dramatically and, a week early. I mean, it was almost so apparent to me. But it was at 6 years old that he got the official diagnosis. And it was the ADHD I really intuitively knew. The dyslexia was actually a surprise in the sense that, I mean, for me looking back, I never liked to read. Reading did not come easy for me. I'm still not a fast reader. I fatigue very easily when I read. I mix up sometimes letters and numbers, but I could get by. It wasn't that, and frankly, I thought of a lot of those issues as really being kind of part of the ADHD in ways. And now looking back, wondering if there's a sort of mild or a touch of dyslexia. With my son's experience, it was very, very apparent. I mean, even though his vocabulary was like super high, like you can say like any kind of SAT word, and I would even like test it and just say some big vocabulary word, and a week later he would say that word in the correct context. I'd be like, oh, how do you know the meaning of that word? And he's like, oh, I remember last week you referred to so-and-so as loquacious, and that and it sounded like from the words around it that it meant they talked too much. And so he used that word. So his teacher said, he's having a hard time decoding certain sounds, which is part of what dyslexia is that automatic phonemic awareness we have when we see the letter B, we think of the B sound, or the letter G is the G sound. That doesn't come as automatically to people with dyslexia. And a lot of the sort of alphabetic principles that we learn. So if you know that AT is the at sound and you know the alphabet, then you pretty much know you could be bat, cat, fat, hat, and you just go down the line because the at is now like a unit. To someone with dyslexia, it's as if you're seeing those letters for the first time. So it's like sounding each of those things out, which slow down your reading. And I remember when he was 5.5 and we saw the word the, he said to he, because people with dyslexia also tend to spell very phonetically. So to me, it's actually very easy to read the spelling because it's just phonetic. I mean, so knife is spelled N-I-F-E, and he said to he, and I said, oh, that's the, and then a couple words down the sentence, the word the, and he was to he, and I thought, okay. And his teacher said there's something. So I'm like, let's do the full neuropsych. And he had actually quite severe dyslexia. And so I was like, okay, first thing we did, I went on Amazon, got every book that was geared towards kids about dyslexia, because ADHD has sort of been talked about in the house. Like that's something, I would put that because I knew that was there. The dyslexia was, okay, this is something I don't want him thinking he's stupid. I don't want him, because he's going to have to be like pulled out of classes for special ed and things like that and I don't want him to feel sort of ostracized and isolated. So we have to me, could care less if he learns to read War and Peace and Shakespeare. I just don't want his self-esteem to be lessened by this. So I got every book. And then and his favorite show was Shark Tank at the time. And 3 of the sharks on Shark Tank are dyslexic. Mr. Wonderful, Damon Johns, and Barbara Corcoran, all dyslexia, which is not a coincidence, actually. You'll see a very high prevalence of ADHD and dyslexia in entrepreneurs and inventors and creative individuals, because these are people who tend to think in very non-conventional ways, which can be hard in certain scenarios like mainstream schooling, but is rewarded in a lot of other endeavors that we're in. So I said, 3 of the sharks have dyslexia. Oh, and then I was like, okay, how now? I'm not, as a father, I can't be with him 100% of the time to immunize and sort of protect these situations. So we would do role plays. And I said to him, well, one, I called it what it is. It's called dyslexia. We don't shy away from the name. And I get it, because parents don't want their kids to feel different. But what I say is, well, your kid is different, but different isn't defective. We want to teach them that their differences is to be celebrated, and that there are hard things about these conditions, and there are strengths that come along with these conditions. And I said to him, it's called dyslexia. Three of the sharks on Shark Tank. I said, a lot of people don't understand what this is. So some people are going to be very confused by it. And frankly, some people might be like, what do you mean you don't know how to read? Or why are you being pulled out of class? Or things like that. And then some people are not nice about it. You know, some people might say, oh, you're stupid or you're dumb. So we would role play. I'd say, so what if somebody says, what do you mean you can't read? Because again, this is a kid whose vocabulary was like off the charts. And if people would just, we don't think of someone who has that kind of vocabulary as having a hard time read. And you just simply say, oh, I have this thing called dyslexia. Some of the sharks on Shark Tank have it. Tom Cruise is dyslexic. And it's just, it makes it hard for me to read sounds. And we just would role play it. What happens if somebody is not nice about it? How do we sort of respond to it? And one of my greatest moments, you know, is I mean, I have many great moments as a dad, but one that like, oh my gosh, just almost like, I almost went into tears in the moment. I was picking him up from school. And he was like, oh, how was your day? He was like, great. I had a wonderful day. And he's like, in music class, we were singing songs and it was fun. And I said, great. And he said, oh, I couldn't read any of the words though on the paper. And I said, oh, what did you do? He said, oh, I went to one of my classmates. I said, oh, can I stand next to you and hear you say the words? Because I can't read any of these words. I'm dyslexic. And she went, what? What do you mean you can't read the words? And he said, I don't think she was being mean. I think she was just surprised. So I just said to her, I have this thing called dyslexia, which Tom Cruise and some of the sharks on Shark Tank have, and just makes it hard for me to read letters. And she went, okay. And that was it. And then he, you know, sang the songs with her. And I thought, oh my gosh, like that's like that moment right there that had he not been prepared for that, he could have been crushed by that, you know, someone saying, what do you mean you don't know how to read? And he could have been like, or he might not have had the courage to even ask, can I stand next to you? And then just mouth the words and felt sort of disconnected. And that is to me, the role, so much of when I think about fatherhood is just keeping your kids feeling empowered and having them feel that, you know, they're not going to be great at everything. Nobody is perfect. But to feel confident that even with what your issues, flaws, difficulties are, that you have worth, you have value, and to still feel empowered by that. And that was like one of those moments that really felt that to me.
Wow. That was amazing. And so many knowledge bombs dropped there. Like, I mean, I would say we just had a dad moment. You provided a dad moment for us. That was amazing.
Are you a dad who feels like you're juggling a million things at once? Balancing work, family, and personal goals can be overwhelming. But what if there was a solution? That's why we created our new fatherhood community called Dad Mentor. For over 20 years, Dad Central has built practical tools to help dads. We understand the challenges you face and provide the support you need to thrive. The biggest complaint we hear from dads is there's no dedicated support for their specific needs. But not anymore. Our new community, called Dad Mentor, is here to transform your fatherhood experience. Imagine feeling in control, staying calm and patient when your children misbehave. Picture yourself connected to your children, guiding them with confidence and watching them succeed. When you join Dad Mentor, you'll have access to a community of like-minded dads committed to their dad journey, just like you. You'll also get the Dad's Roadmap. This is a step-by-step plan to help you go from unsure to unstoppable as a dad. Monthly masterclasses and Q&A sessions. You'll get answers and know exactly what to do straight from experts. Monthly group meetups that connect dads over common topics. A dad's resource library. Curated webinars, podcasts, or guides built by Dad Central to help you grow as a parent. And finally, you'll also get exclusive members-only offers and events. Now, many dads do try to do this fatherhood thing alone, only to find themselves trapped in frustration and strained relationships. Then they may turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms like drugs, alcohol, or other distractions, leaving their family and their own well-being at risk. We don't want you to reach that point of regret. Take steps to invest in you and your family today. Join Dad Mentor and go from stressed, tired, and overwhelmed to confident, calm, and connected. Join us today by going to dadcentral.ca/dads.
I have so many conversation pieces, but I'm going to put it here. I don't know if it's better at the end, but I just, in my heart, in my mind, how do you feel having the opportunity of growing up with ADHD, having children with ADHD, and being able to fulfill your purpose, empowering dads and families with ADHD? Like, I'm just, you've lived with this all your life, but being able to be successful father, raising kids, but also being successful helping other dads, families with it also. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think, and this is why it's, for me, very important in being open about my experience, because, when I was in grad school, you were sort of taught, like, there's a boundary and you there is no personal disclosures and that sort of thing. And you create space, for your patient, which for the most part, absolutely, makes sense. And unless, though, that disclosure is in service of the patient and their families and helping them. And I see myself and I share my story because I want to be a representation to say, like, look, because some parents, they get, less so today than 20 years ago, but still could get scared when you're like, oh my gosh, like what I read about ADHD is kids are more likely to be addicts and this and end up in jail. And there's truth in that there's a higher risk factor, but most kids with ADHD are not, don't get addicted to drugs. However, a very high prevalence of people who are addicted to drugs, you'll often see there's a high prevalence of ADHD. And so it works in one direction, but not the other. But to be a model to say, look, I hated school. And so when your kid is saying that they hate school in 5th grade, I don't want you to get super anxious, like, oh my gosh, it's like, but I can tell you, once they lock into the thing that they really like for me, it was psychology senior year of high school. Prior to senior year of high school, I had a conversation with my parents, like, I'm not going to do this college thing because I'm just going to waste your money. I'm going to get into a little bit of trouble. And I love music, but I had enough. And my dad, again, which I appreciate, my parents were not the, oh no, you're not, kind of people, because frankly, that wouldn't have worked for me. I would have just hit back, in some ways, like verbally, of course. And so my dad said, how would you support yourself, doing that? And I'm not, I can keep a beat, but I'm not a drummer. I'm not a Grammy award-winning drummer, as much as I would have loved to have seen myself as that. And I said, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. And then I took psychology my senior year of high school, and that was, oh my gosh, I love this. And I'm going to apply, college, and got in. And then 2 weeks into college, I remember reading what you can do with a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, and all that. And I said, I think I'm just going to go for the PhD because that'll open every door for me. And they were like, okay, I would have been the least likely to have gotten a PhD of my siblings prior to that time. Elect to do, let's do 5 more years of school, like after your 4 year. But I loved it. It was honestly easier for me to get through my PhD program than high school, because high school, I was so bored. And so sharing those kinds of stories and letting people know, like, this is one of many faces of people with ADHD. And at the same time, I also want to share with people that just because I have a PhD after my name, or it doesn't mean I'm so far away from those people who really go down dark paths. I have a very addictive personality. I completely understand the wiring of people who do get wrapped up in some of those things. And so I never want people to think I'm so far away from that either, because we should have compassion, and we moralize issues like addiction and things like that in this culture, which we shouldn't. And especially with dads, when I talk with dads, whether because again, a lot of because it's so heritable, ADHD, if your child has ADHD, maybe I can count on one hand how many times I've worked with a family where neither of their biological parents had ADHD. So if you have ADHD, it's like a 70% chance you're going to have a kid with ADHD. So a lot of times, particularly with the dads I talk to, who they might have undiagnosed ADHD and not realize it. And then through our conversations, they realize I can relate to this a little bit too much. And they almost don't want to look at it because they fear, oh, I pass this on, to my kid. And I'm like, no, this isn't a disease that, yes, there is a wiring that got passed on, but this is a great opportunity now. You can share whether, even if it were the mistakes or not great decisions that you made, because that will help them understand why perhaps you are parenting them the way you did. Like, I was very strict with my kids around sleep, for example, because for me, when I was in college, like, sleep was like a disposable thing. Like, sleep was what happens when there's no more fun to be had or nothing left to do. Like, and I was someone, no caffeine. I didn't start drinking coffee till my son was born. I could be pulling all nighter, you wouldn't even know the difference. I'm a very high energy individual. And so, but it's not healthy to not get good sleep. So there's a reason I got mono, I've had shingles, I've had things that your body shouldn't be experiencing at a young age, because I was just taxing it and wearing it down. And sleep issues are very common for people with ADHD. And I said, look, I'm going to be very, very strict, because I don't want, like, part of being a dad is you feel like you want to improve on the recipe. It's like a really good, like, tomato sauce, that passes from generation to generation. Then sometimes the new generation adds something to make that taste even better. And I said, so my job is to improve on it so that the pitfalls I hit, I don't want you to hit. And I always want them to have compassion for the people that, sometimes just are not privy sometimes to that information or education. Like, even with my son's experience with dyslexia, that he's a freshman in college, he's doing great, he's up to grade level. His dyslexia is not this obstacle. And it's like, but he has worked tremendously to do that. And of course, my wife and I have supported that. And we recognize the privilege that I had the information that I had, and to have compassion because sometimes people don't know what they don't know, sort of thing. So I love working with people. I mean, I honestly can tell you, I've never had a boring day. I never see myself fully retiring. As long as I can talk and think, I'm going to be doing this. So I can do this till I'm 95. I plan on living to at least to 100. And I have longevity, and my dad lived to 90, and my mom in her late 80s, and my grandmother to 99. So knock on wood, I just have to work on my sleep. But I love that connection, and particularly with dads too, because as parents, we're obviously what's more important than our children? I mean, there's nothing more important. And I remember even when my son was born, I tell people this story of, like, I was kind of the kind of kid, I didn't really have a lot of, like, fears of things. Like, I never felt like something, I mean, not that I didn't have anxieties about certain things, but this sense, like, I felt pretty, like, tough, like, in a lot of ways, like, confident. And I remember when my son was born, feeling this, like, rush of fear mixed in with, like, a spiritually dimensional happiness. And I didn't understand the fear part until, like, I remember weeks later, I was just writing in a journal and just kind of reflecting on that. And I realized what that was this incredible vulnerability that I felt more than I've ever felt in my life. Because I'm like, if something happens to this being, I'd be destroyed. Like, and I never really felt that way prior to that experience. Like, when you have children, there's something that's so otherworldly, and that feeling is so powerful. And I know a lot of the dads that I work with, whether it's them directly or if I'm working with their kids, they're really tough on themselves and feeling like, oh, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. And I'm like, we know you want to do the best, that you can do. And at the same time, to recognize there are things that are just out of your hands. Like, genetics are, what they are, but we have to parent to those genetics and be self-compassionate at the same time.
Drew?
Well, Doctor, so much of what you've shared, I want to resonate with, but I think there's so much wisdom in what you've shared. So I don't want to go past it without at least like naming some of the things you're talking about. In particular, when it comes to helping your children not shy away from, let's say ADHD or dyslexia or some other neurodivergent sort of category. So not shying away from the hard truth of it. And I think that's so powerful. The other thing is though, but also that role playing as a fantastic tool to empower your children, but also to bring in other stories or examples where you used, Tom Cruise, Damon John, these entrepreneurs, and essentially normalize it. And say, yes, it's different. It's going to be harder, but you still have the ability of essentially seeing it as, how do you use this as a strength? What are you exceptional at? And how can you maximize this? I think that's really powerful and important. And so anyways, those are two things that you mentioned before, but I wanted to maybe ask this question from your perspective, because as you've been talking, you've talked mostly about some like the relational elements of relating to your child or relating to yourself and doing it in ways that are, to me, very healthy, very empowering. But I think there's this whole idea that you've got to medicate when you have ADHD. And I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about, this idea, because that's the first thing that some people go to. Whereas some of the things that you're talking about, to me, are very powerful because they create connection, which is, to me, even more fun. But anyways, I leave it to you because you're the expert. What are your thoughts on this idea of the medication piece in ADHD?
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist, so I don't prescribe medication. But so we look at medication as can be incredibly helpful, could be for some people a very, very powerful tool, and in helping them get to a place where they can then use the skills. So I never want families or people to feel stigmatized from taking medication. Sometimes in talking with dads who might be like, oh, I feel like I've failed if my kid, quote unquote, has to be on medication. And I want people to sort of look at it as, well, if you have diabetes, we take insulin. If we, have any kind of condition, this is a medication that is meant to, treat and manage a certain thing. This isn't a failure on your part. Now, having said that, we also say in the ADD community, pills don't teach skills. So what the medication is meant to do is to get somebody to a place where they can then absorb and internalize the skills, the strategies, and all of that really is the core of how we live with ADHD. In the same ways that, like, if you're visually, I wear contacts. Like, if I don't have my contacts, or if I'm not wearing glasses, everything is very, very blurry. So I'm not going to squint through the whole day and say, oh, I'm not going to wear those glasses. But I put in contacts, that doesn't do all the work for me. It just now makes me able to do whatever work I need to do. Now, not everyone who has ADHD is on medication. And if there are ways that for some people, the behavioral skills, the strategies, the accountability, the structure, there are lots of things that sort of can affect and help sort of ground people with ADHD. That's fine. And then there are some people that take it and, about 20 to 25% of people don't respond to medication. Because oftentimes with ADHD, it's the rule rather than the exception that you'll see other conditions. So you'll see anxiety, or you might see mood issues, and for some people, substance abuse issues later in life. And so sometimes the medications are interacting, with those things as well. And so, we want to always teach those strategies. And at the same time, for some people, it's, again, very, very important. Like, for example, if we take substance abuse, that even though stimulant medication that's the first line of treatment for ADHD, there are a lot of misperceptions and myths out there. One of them being that you can get addicted to it. People without ADHD can get very addicted to Adderall and Ritalin because it's speed. It's basically a stimulant in the brain. But an ADHD brain is different. It metabolizes that medication differently. It's releasing dopamine, which is the neurochemical implicated in reward and also implicated in addiction. It's titrating it in a different way in the ADHD brain, which not only doesn't cause someone to speed up and get high addiction potential, but actually grounds them so they're better able to manage their impulses. And studies show for individuals, let's say, who are in recovery or sobriety for an alcohol or drug problem, who have ADHD, who are taking stimulants, are less likely to relapse into their addiction. And so this can be a very powerful treatment for some people. So I never want people to feel they're taking the easy way out by taking meds, because it really isn't. Again, the medication is not taking them away from still having to learn skills and strategies and work on the self-esteem stuff and all of that. And for a lot of people, they don't have to take medication because they have skills or structures and support scaffolding in place that where they don't need that as much. But you always still need the strategies, the skills. And to me, the most important part, the first thing I always focus on with clients of mine and as a dad is your identity around this. Because I feel, and I don't say everyone has to see it this way, but I don't think of myself as having ADHD as much as I am it. Like, it's just like every part of like my being is kind of through that lens. And the more we learn and the more research that comes out, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, that's why that was a difficult thing for me. Or this is why, like, I feel like my orientation to the world is what is going to stimulate me, which is very much what we know is common for people with ADHD. And so I want people to have an identity of themselves as yes, you're different compared to the peer next to you, because they know it. I mean, every person with ADHD, you can ask, when did you first know something was a little bit different? And it's early. For me, it was 5 years old when all the kids were picking out a book at book time out of the milk crates and sitting there for, I think it was 10, 15 minutes. It felt like an eternity to me. And I remember thinking, are people really reading this book? It's so quiet. And I like noise. I like stuff happening. And I remember asking my friend Craig, back then I was like, were you really reading the book? And he's like, yeah, we were supposed to read the book. And I thought, I wasn't reading the book. I just was. And I remember, that's my earliest memory of something. I didn't know what it was. Thankfully, I didn't think, oh, something's really wrong with me, but it's so easy to feel that way with ADHD. And like you were saying, what are models? Michael Phelps, one of our greatest Olympic athletes of all time, ADHD, various musicians, various inventors, various athletes, like whatever your kid is interested in. I tell the dads that I work with, if your kid's into athletes, have athletic representation. If your kid's is into science, there are scientists, Nobel Prize winners that have ADHD. My favorite fiction book of all time is called And Then There Were None, or 10 Little Indians by Agatha Christie, who is the world's probably most renowned mystery writer. It was the first book assigned in school that I actually read from cover to cover. And it turns out posthumously that sort of from letters and accounts that she wrote that she likely had dyslexia. And meanwhile, she's like, this world famous like novelist. So whatever your kid's interested in, find models of representation. And also, realizing as a person of color, like coming from a child of immigrants, of Hispanic, background, as well as a lot of other things that we're in a space now in the ADHD field where there's a lot more work to be done on how it's talked about in minority communities, in different socioeconomic status, and recognizing how important it is to have that visibility on all different levels. Because even culturally with, whether I'm working with a dad, Latino dad, who sometimes the view is that the kid just needs more discipline, as opposed to, no, they need structure, but we can't, discipline the ADHD out of them. Like, we just have to find a way of leaning into giving like proper boundaries, or other cultures that might fear that this is going to be a label that follows them for the rest of their lives, and sort of looking at it through a culturally competent lens is so important as well.
Wow, Drew, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so good, so relevant, but really what comes to mind is back to I'm going to call it like a fundamental of really understanding your child and meeting them where they're at, as really the starting point to be able to move forward. And that example, you can't discipline it out. You can't, all these other things out. It's recognizing it for what it is, understanding it. I love your example of when I found out my son had dyslexia, I went and I basically got all the resources I could and I devoured them and I learned as much as I could so I could be prepared. And I think that's the other theme that's coming up for me, but I'll save it for the end when I do my little wrap up. But thank you. I mean, it's so good.
Yeah. I love how you've leaned into it. A lot of dads and parents would lean away, but you've leaned in, not only personally, professionally, you've leaned into it. And the benefits have been monumental.
Yeah, and I appreciate, because that to me is probably the mission, and all of the education and the knowledge base that I have. But the main thing is, absolutely lean into it. We don't have to be afraid of it, because if we're afraid of it, we're afraid of a part of ourselves. I mean, it feels so fundamental to who we are. And I don't want anyone feeling less than. That's sort of that was a very important lesson in my household, is you're neither superior nor inferior to anybody. And it pains me when people, and I work with many people who feel less than, and that's the mission, is to, empower.
Love it. Well, we've hit right on time. So I wanted to say thank you first and foremost for taking the time out of your positive, productive schedule as a dad, an educator, a lean-in advocate when it comes to ADHD. I think that'd be your tagline, the lean-in advocate of ADHD.
I love it. Like,
certainly no problem. And just quote me if you ever use it, all right? Just
absolutely.
Joking aside, but just want to say, how can people get in touch with you?
So I don't have any social media presence. So if people have any questions, or if you're looking for resources in your area, just shoot me an email, Roberto_Olivardia at hms.harvard.edu, and I'll be happy to respond.
Well, on behalf of the Dad Central family worldwide, I want to say thank you for all you have done, are doing, and will be doing in this area. And if there's anything we can do to help you lean in further, we're here. We're here to serve you. So thank you so much for your time. And I have a funny feeling there's going to be a part 2 and maybe even a part 3 to this. So make sure
I hope so.
Okay, well, good stuff. Well, don't just manage your time, manage your energy, and remember to give yourself grace.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here talking with you guys.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good.
So good. So good. And, one of the elements that I stopped myself from saying, but I'm going to say now, is the important role that fathers have to prepare their children. And I'm going to use another word, to protect them, right? I think what he, when he tells that story about, his son, and really the mission that he talked about at the end is, not feeling less than, and, to be able to prepare your child to face a world that might view you as less than, or might challenge your identity to maybe even make you feel less than, is to me so valuable and so important. And it's also serves, I think, such a very important protective factor for that concept of identity he referred to. So to me, it's a real important takeaway, your role to prepare your children as a father.
Yeah, there's so many things. And there was something Roberto said, and I can't remember exactly. I'm going to have to, I will watch the replay, but he said different. He said different doesn't have to be difficult. I don't know if it's that, if he said that, I don't, and I got to go through, but that just went, I said, bam, that's a knowledge bomb right there. I thought that was just so empowering, not only ADHD, but just in many things. Just because it's different, it doesn't have to be difficult. If the support, the connection is there, it's so huge. But yeah, I think we're doing a part 2, Drew.
It'll be wonderful. Look forward to it. When it happens.
Okay. So As always, we want to say the Dad Central Show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of men, because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. Also, we'd love to hear from you. What do you like? What do you want us to do more of? Just your feedback. Email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. Also, listen to replays of our epic conversations or watch them. Go to our website, dadcentral.ca/podcast. And finally, we have lots of great resources, a lot of them free, at dadcentral.ca. So as we end off, as always, thank you for taking the time out of your positive, productive schedule, dad or not dad, to watch, listen. And as always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy, and remember to give yourself grace. And we will see you soon. Be well and keep the faith.